Because leadership is stewardship of resources, of opportunities, of the future, and because leadership is also shepherding people that we are responsible for, but also people that the organization or the ministry will serve in the future, succession is really important because we're stewarding the future, not just the ministry or the organization today, and we're shepherding people, not just who are currently in the ministry, but also those that the ministry or the organization will serve in the future. People are asking a lot of questions about succession as the boomer generation, many of leaders, whether in the marketplace or in ministry, are coming to a point in their life, a crossroads where they're handing the reins of the ministry that they've led or the marketplace that they've led to somebody else. And so we are getting a lot of questions about succession. And in this very first episode, we're going to talk about how the leader prepares himself or herself for the succession that's going to happen. Because it seems to me, Kenton, that a lot of people who have asked us questions about succession are skipping over that part. And they're wanting to run to the practicality of where do I look for another leader? What's my role going to be in the future? As opposed to the heart of the leader who's transitioning. So in the first episode, I'm so excited to be interviewing my predecessor, Kenton Beshore. The majority of the content from this episode will come from his wisdom. I'll ask some questions and try to apply to leaders in different contexts. But the succession story at Mariners Church would not have happened without Kenton Beshore being prepared in his heart for a long, sustained period of time that succession was to happen. And so when leaders have asked me, potential predecessors have asked me about a potential succession that they're going to walk into, I can tell in some of the questions that they're unsure if the person who is going to be handing the reins over is really ready to hand the reins over. And if you weren't ready, succession would not have happened. And if you had not been healthy, succession would have not happened in a healthy way. So I believe the successful, healthy transition at Mariners Church really began with and you may be shocked to hear this, listener, essentially a decade of preparation of God doing a deep work in your heart, preparing you. So first question, what made you even think about succession? Because you thought about it earlier than many leaders think about it.
Yeah, and I think God made me think about it. My first thought about it was I was in seminary, and I actually came to Mariners as a college pastor. And I got to watch Mariners go through 3 terrible successions and learn powerful lessons. So the first guy I came to work for had a great sense of identity. He was a great teacher of God's word. And the church had a real strong bias for equipping people and then releasing them. He wrote a book on personal evangelism, so it was share your story. So he leaves. He went and took the he became president at Multnomah School of the Bible. So then they go on. So now we have to go through a succession. They immediately get a committee, get a search committee. Never took time to say, who are we? What's our DNA? What's our identity? What's our story? They just thought all pastors are the same.
Yeah.
They began to look at it. So they end up hiring a guy that's a seeker-driven guy. Now, I'm a young guy in seminary. It doesn't bother me because I think, okay, seeker-driven was kind of new then.
But a very different DNA selection.
Different identity.
Yeah.
And so now you have a different identity, different story, and so now you have a big crisis in leadership. Goes really bad because when you have a crisis in leadership, it always gets personal. So they attack the pastor. He's got bad character. He splits the church. So massive pain. Now the next transition is just an overreaction. That guy didn't have character. So they hire a good, godly man, older man, but ineffective as a leader. His identity is good, but he's ineffective as a leader. And in Southern California, you got to be effective.
Yeah.
So again, another bad choice. He lasts a year. Then they make another, they choose another guy. And this is the one where the staff got real involved in it. And so when do employees get to choose their boss? So that was messed up. I was a part of that. And as a result, they choose bad again. So what I learned from all that is this. You have to have the story of the church, clear. What's the identity, the DNA? What's your strategy? You have to know who you are. Secondly, you have to have the story of the community in mind. Who are we? What's happening in our community? And you have to have the story of the senior pastor. Those three things have to merge. So that happened to me when I'm a seminary student.
So you're in your young 20s.
Yeah.
And you are already seeing some bad succession happen.
Terrible. And it affected me personally.
Yeah. And some lessons there. And it's common, basically, there was a mismatch in story or DNA.
Right.
I mean, basically a major swing away from what the church was to the next leader.
Good people. I mean, these were good people in the church. I knew them, and they're volunteers. They want to do great. And they're just looking at the church and going, aren't all churches the same? Aren't we all love Jesus? But they don't understand underneath just the subtleties of a different strategy, a different identity.
The philosophy, the theology.
Yeah. So important.
Well, it's fascinating. I want to be sure everyone knows who I'm talking to. This is Kenton Beshore. So he was in his 20s, college pastor at Mariners Church. Then he, after that, gets hired as the senior pastor, served as senior pastor for 35 years. And then I became his predecessor after a long, faithful, amazing run at Mariners Church. He still is on our team now as pastor emeritus. Most people don't have any idea what pastor emeritus means.
Neither do I. That's the best part.
But it means for us that he still teaches regularly on our weekend services. He mentors other senior pastors, and he's an extension of our church into a lot of other places that we're so grateful for Kenton being able to continue to serve and represent Mariners Church.
So let me tell you the second thing that happened. So then when I became the senior pastor, I was around, my class created a number of large churches. Bob Buford through Leadership Network had a big influence on us all. And I remember sitting at a table with a number of large churches, large church pastors who you'd know. And he said, you know what? No one in the large church has figured out how to do succession.
How old are you at this time?
I'm in my 40s.
Okay.
And he says, you guys better figure it out before you get there, because you guys are building these big churches. There's lots of land, lots of money, big budgets. You better figure out what you're doing. And that hit me. And then the third thing that happened on a regular basis is that I take a summer break. Yep. And when I was off on my summer break, I have 4 sons, and I regularly almost died. I mean, literally. I mean, we'd go wakeboarding.
No, but you try to do that sometimes.
It's
not like those are free things. You push the envelope.
I do. Yeah. But I thought, I mean, literally, there were times in the summer that I thought, if I were to die, what would happen to the church? So you take those stories and you go, I saw really bad transitions. I got Buford saying, you guys better figure this out. The church is starting to own a lot of property, significant budget. And I'm saying, what happens if I die? And so the first thing that I did, and it was one of the best things, and this is what I say to people all the time, if you want to do anything, all you have to do is take the first step and come up with a crisis plan. And you think, any senior pastor, to have a crisis plan is sort of like job 101. What happens in case, for whatever reason, I can't do the job. And what it does is it gives to these good-hearted people who are volunteers a lot of times.
And you mean like the elders?
Elders, yeah. People, whoever is in charge for making the decision. What you're giving to them is you're giving them sort of the basics. But what it does is so good, because it starts kind of a snowball where you begin to have to answer some really key questions, and you start to think it through. And as a result of it, you become a way better senior pastor. So
when's the first year that you did a crisis plan?
It was my mid-40s.
Okay,
so 25, 30 years ago.
So you've been doing crisis plans for many years before succession.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't like you just did a crisis plan and then 2 years later you're starting succession.
No.
But the crisis plan helped you think, I won't be here forever.
That's right. It does a number of good things for you, which we'll talk about as we go through it. But what it really does is it puts on the table, for me, it puts on the table my mortality, but it also makes me be aware of my responsibility, and it also makes me a better senior pastor. So I'll show you how that works. Yeah. First thing it does is you say, okay, you answer basic questions. Okay, if I were to die, what would happen? So you think of the weekends. Well, what would be the best place to happen? Now I know pastor's not there. if you've got a speaking team that'll last a certain rate, but then there's a certain amount of time. But there's also personalities that might want to vie for the job. What do you want to do about that? And how are you going to answer those questions? But if you don't, boundaries are really the issue. And so the roles and responsibilities for the elders, the roles and responsibilities for the pastoral staff, you start to get real clear, because you say, in every bad transition, what happens is the elders or the leaders, they see the day-to-day stuff of the church and they go, oh my gosh, who's going to do that? Who's going to teach each week? How are the staff meetings going to be run? How are we going to do the budgets? And so the people who are designed to make the most important decision, who's our next pastor, and how do we choose them, and what should they look like? They drop down into the weeds and they start running the church day to day. That immediately gives the church a cold. I mean, it's got an infection. And so now they're looking down and they're running it, which then the pastors are offended because they're not trusted to run it. So the first thing that you do in it is you just create some boundaries. You say, okay, and so the first goal that I had in a crisis plan was that I could say to the elders that the pastors can run this church for a year without any input from you, without any guidance.
Now, that's big, and I want to be sure to set some context, because some listening might not have elders, they might have trustees or a personnel committee, but essentially you're saying those who have authority over the whole church, typically as some type of volunteer team, they should not plug into the day-to-day, even in an emergency plan. You got to keep them high level, mainly focused on hiring the next senior pastor.
Because that's the only group that can do it.
They got to do that.
But it's so rewarding and so immediate to solve all these immediate needs. And so they're going to, unless you give them a plan.
So you got to give them a plan that keeps them high level, future focused. And then the staff.
So then what you do
they
is,
run day to day.
So you say, okay, what would it take? And the church, I started with the church, there's a couple hundred people. I didn't have staff. So even early on, my crisis plans didn't have staff. So even if you are in a church and you don't have a staff, you'd still say the goal would be, however you did it, what can I give to the church, the leadership in black and white that says, here's how weekends are covered for 1 year. 1 year.
That's great. Hey, let's apply
this is how staff meetings are covered for 1 year.
I love it. Let's apply this for a marketplace leader.
Okay.
So succession planning for a leader trying to get his or her heart ready. What's some general principles on an emergency plan that this team does day to day, and that this external group is going to be in charge of hiring the successor? Yeah,
in my experience, people in the marketplace are really good at this because shareholders and money makes you good at it. And so they just don't tolerate it. And so I think literally in most job descriptions and marketplace leaders, what's your succession plan? Because they're saying, we need to know your team can do these things. So it's demanded of them. And they, a lot of the stuff I got was, it's really better in the marketplace. They figured it out.
Well, I'm going to share something now that few people know, only a couple people on the team at Mariners know, but this year was my first year of doing the emergency succession plan. So I've been here 4 years now, and the elders asked me as one of my annual goals to do it. And I didn't share it with many people, but it's filed away for. I'm not going wakeboarding, but if something happens.
But I'll tell you,
but it did help me think through.
It does, and I'll tell you the value of then sharing it, because so when I did it, I had to come up with, okay, here's the responsibility for the whatever volunteer leadership team. Your job is to hold the long-term vision and choose the next senior pastor. Here, minimally with the staff, you've got to run this church for a year. Weekends, they've got to be great. You got to love the people, and it can't go backwards. So you've got to have that. Well, then immediately what you realize is, or what I realized, I had not done a good job with my elders because there was no way they were ready to pick a senior pastor. Remember, I had gone through really bad succession. So I'm going, they don't know the DNA. They don't know the strategy. They don't know. Now, they theologically know it today if I'm in the room, but they don't know the deep doctrinal beliefs of the church and the theology of the church. They don't know the nuances of, some of the things that we believe about the poor, about, poverty, about race, about sexuality. They just don't have that kind of sophistication. And so you realize if they're going to make a good choice, I have to teach them. And I basically started to list out, and I go, I've got to teach them the doctrines of the church, which I love to do, but I never thought of it before.
Right.
And then what our strategy as a church is, what is our mission, vision, values, the unique DNA, what are the unique things of our beliefs, so that they would be adequate to actually give direction and choose. And I had never thought of it that way before. And literally, it became a 2-year training. So this is why you want to do it. It became a 2-year training cycle for elders, and elders meetings. Part of every elder meeting was just a training. And I would say, it would be 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Okay, here, I just want to go through again our strategy. I want to go through this doctrinal belief. I want to go. And so every 2 years, elders serve for 4. So they got to hear it twice. But my goal was, these people have to be rock solid. They have to be able to make the right choice. They have to understand our identity. They have to understand our unique story. Right. So our story, our history had to be a part of that. Elders then were trained. Then the same thing with the staff. It became part of the staff training, because you go, well, the staff should know this. Because one of the things that I determined because of my story is staff should not be a part of ever selecting a senior pastor for a couple reasons. One is their career is too tied into their beliefs. They can't see it outside of their career. 2, they don't see the church accurately. Staff always looks at the church from the inside, or the community from the inside out. And the people that are volunteers in the church really have a better view of the church, because they look at the church from the community in, and they see what the church needs to be. And you don't get to choose your boss. So what I did, my belief is, since staff should not be a part of the hiring process, I just drew that real clear boundary. I said my goal was staff, every year I'd go over the emergency plan, the crisis plan, and I would say to the staff, the board will trust you to run this for 1 year. They believe you can run it for a year. This is how weekends will be run. This is how staff will be run. And none of you will be talked to. None of you will be considered for the position, and they are not interested in your opinions. And if you try to insert yourself, you'll lose your job. And I said it straight up to them.
That's pretty clear, Kenton.
That's right. I go, so you do it. So, And then to the elders, I said, the staff can run this. You have to trust them. You have been trained. Now you can go out and you can make the right choice. And so what it did is it created clear boundaries, clear responsibilities. And then it made me go, I've got to train these people so that they're ready to do it. And what it does for you, okay, just as you step back, is, because your question was, how does it prepare you? Well, what it does is it makes you better as a church, but you're preparing the church, and you're preparing your own mindset, that you're saying and acknowledging at least once a year, there is going to be a day that this church goes on without me. Maybe I die, maybe it doesn't matter how it happens. Right. But the one thing that everyone can absolutely know for sure, there's a day when I wouldn't be the pastor. Right. I mean, you just know it's inevitable. But I was acknowledging it, and a crisis plan does this beautiful thing, because it sets you up and you go, okay, now here you have it.
Man, I love the clarity that it provided, and the additional thinking that it forced you to do. So that's one thing you did for sure, was a crisis plan helped you prepare your heart for succession. Right. What are some other things? I know you said the annual study break also helped, because it would teach you to not have your identity as the senior pastor during those weeks. Yeah. But I'm looking for some other things that a leader who is thinking, it's even 10 years away that I'm gonna step away, but I want to step away I want to be healthy when I step away. What can I do to prepare my heart for the moment of stepping away?
So I did the most fun thing. This came with Bob Buford going, what are you going to do? And so he said, no churches know how to do it. So I said, okay. And I got a life transition team. And I got 5 people that I trusted that had all gone through a transition. These are people in the business world, and they had built a company, or they were the head of a company, and they had transitioned out of it. And I had 4 guys and 1 gal who had made the transition, because I thought we needed, Lori and I needed to have the counsel. We only met with them 1 time a year. initially. But I got them together for breakfast, and we met for a few hours and basically said, at some point, sometime out there, I'm going to make a transition. What would you say to me? And it was gold.
Wow.
And every church has it. But these people are people who had made the transition. They had done it. And it was amazing. And what I got out of it, I got a lot of practical things. But the best thing I got was that group said, we're willing to walk through this with you.
That's
they
beautiful.
go, we'll meet with you once a year.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I need to spend a lot of time on it, but it was just once a year we met. And then they would talk to me and ask questions. And I'll tell you, the best thing I got out of it was they ask legacy questions, which are, I don't know whoever.
They ask questions about your legacy.
Legacy. So legacy questions are, when you leave, what do you want said about you? What do you want people to remember about you? What do you want the church to look like when you step away? Who do you want to be? They're such big questions, but they would force me to answer them. And what is totally surprising to me is I kept notes. This was 17 years, I think I did this.
Whoa, you did 17 years.
Yeah, 17 years that I met with those people. So I started way back when I was 45, 15 years.
So I want to ask this.
Just one time. There was one time.
But were you worried at all? I'm thinking about the pastor who's listening or the business leader who's listening and says, man, if I do that, if I pull that group together and then word gets out, people are going to be thinking I'm a lame duck too early. How did you be sure that people didn't think you were already tapping out?
So one is, that's an irrational fear.
Well, I'm just representing.
I know. No, it is.
Yeah.
But if you can't say it to yourself, you got to go, that's an irrational fear, because there's asking the question makes everyone trust you more.
That's great.
Makes everyone love you more, and makes everybody want you more. So the asking of the question.
Because it shows that you care deeply about the church.
And you're confident, and that if it's the right time, God's going to determine the right time, and I'm not afraid of that.
That's gold.
And it is. And so you go, I'm not going to go before or God's absolutely in control, but I'm going to do the best job I can to think this through and to understand it. And trust me, when the board heard that I pulled a group together, they were their response, what are you doing? Where are you going? And I go,
so you did that even without telling the board?
No, I told them.
Okay.
And they had the reaction, which is, oh my gosh,
why are you doing this so
want to leave?
early?
Why do you leave?
Yeah.
And I said, well, because at some point I'll need to do it. And they're like, yeah. And at the same time, don't you think I should think this through?
Yeah.
And I don't think you're the right group to think it through, because they're like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I don't want them. That's what I would be afraid of, is that those people are literally the people that hold my job. And I don't want them. I want to be in a safe place where I can talk about it and talk through every idea, bounce off ideas. Yeah. So then, but they ask, so the first deliverable I get is Lori and I meet with these people, one breakfast, couple hours, once a year. And I have to answer legacy questions, and Lori has to answer legacy questions. And the first thing that I learned, and I think it'll be true of you and every leader, legacy questions and their answers never change. So
really,
I guarantee you, whatever you said today.
So over all those years, you were saying the same thing.
And I guarantee it wouldn't change with you, because what you want at the very core of you. If I said to you, Eric, when you leave, what do you want remembered about you? How do you want people to think about you? What do you want the church to be? I guarantee you that won't change. Strategy, okay.
Yeah.
But basically, these are core questions, and legacy questions don't change. And so I had notes from all those meetings. I look back at them. It did not change. It didn't change for me, or it didn't change for Lori. But answering the question makes you hear yourself say it, and it makes you live it way better. So then when I'm saying, I want to be remembered as a loving pastor, I want to be as a pastor who led well, I want to be somebody who's a spiritual guide, I want to be, certain answers to the questions that I had made me go, I want to create a church that, what do you want the church? I want to have a church that really disciples people, builds people, equips them. And so then you're going, well, I better do that then. Yeah. So then you're forced to do some things. That's great. It does. It is so sharpening. So that is the biggest.
So this is preparing your heart and mind, emergency plan, a crisis plan, these leaders. Anything else you were doing to prepare your heart?
Well, I got to tell you more what they do. So then first you get the legacy questions, but then they start to ask, which really prepares you, the first, always the question is, what would you do next? And so for me, and the group said to me, they go, one thing that anybody knows about me is Kenton loved to be the pastor of Mariners. Kenton will never want to do anything else. I mean,
Right.
That's what everybody would say about me. And that wasn't a surprise because
No,
it's
that's true.
what I love.
Like people are surprised to know this about you because they're like, man, Mariners Church, I've heard so much about Mariners Church, but a lot of people didn't know who you were because you said no to all outside speaking engagements.
Right.
You viewed Orange County, Southern California as the land that the Lord had given you.
Right.
You know, the field that you were to plant in and harvest.
And total clarity on that.
You had really good clarity.
And so I love that. And so they looked at me and they go, Kenton, what would you do?
Yeah, they're thinking because of that, could you do something else? Or would you want to do something else?
And anyone who's done succession, so these are corporate people, they would say, no one leaves unless you have a place to go.
That's good.
It's just an axiom. And so they go, what will you do? And so they asked me, and in 45 years old, 46, I had no idea. I didn't have any answer for 3 years. But the question became haunting.
Yeah.
And so they'd go, well, Kenton, who's impacted your life? What kinds of things would you want to do? And so they forced me to answer it, and I did. And a part of that answer was Lyle Schaller had a huge impact on me. John Stott had a huge impact on me. And the two of them together, I thought, if I could be that for senior pastors, and I'm not John Stott, and I'm not Lyle Schaller, but if I could do that for senior pastors, I go, that's what I would want to do. So they'd said, well, what would that look like? So for a year, I had to think about what did it look like. So I came back, and then that's when I started my first group of guys that I mentored. They were younger pastors, some of the guys that we'd planted churches with. But I started meeting with 8, 10 people, only like 8 times a year for a half a day. It wasn't a big commitment, but it was the first time I had ever done anything where I started to mentor the next generation and pastors.
That's insightful. So you started testing some things while you were senior pastor of things that you would do after you were no longer senior pastor.
And so some pastors you write.
Yeah.
Well, you're always going to write. So you know that. Some teach outside. Some people have, whatever it is. But if you're literally not doing it, which I wasn't, they're going, Kenton, you will never be ready. So that was a super insightful.
That's great.
The really obvious one is money. Vanderbloemen talks about it. Everybody talks about it in succession. If you don't have money to make the transition, and so one guy sat down with me, and you basically have to look at money. But the good side was we had enough time because I started a small church, didn't have any retirement, so part of it was what would it look like at some point to be ready? So financially, if you don't have a plan, you're never going to leave.
Yeah. Now that the research says that, and after I wrote Simple Church, I consulted a bunch of churches, and I had a lot of senior pastors behind closed doors confess, man, I would hand the reins. It's time for me to think about succession, but I just can't. I don't know where my health insurance is going to come from.
Right.
I don't know. I don't have enough in retirement. If there's one hit to the portfolio or the stock market, dives 15%, I don't know how we're going to live. And so churches, they are handcuffing leaders sometimes from not thinking about succession.
Two sides to look at it. Churches are, leaders are.
So the church side from not paying well or not helping out with retirement. What's the leader side?
Because they never point it out. If you go, my experience, and so I've got to coach a bunch of people, and I've sat down with boards. If you talk to a volunteer board and say, you want this guy to stay longer than he's supposed to stay?
Yeah, the answer is no.
Then are you willing to put money towards that? Because the only way you can do that is money. 100% of the time they go, what's it cost? Let's figure it out. And if you do it with enough time, if you have 5 years, it can be solved. 10 years, easily solved.
Okay.
No problem in 10 years. You can solve anyone in 10. 5, if you have 2 years, it's going to be a harder bite, but it still can be solved. And churches are willing to solve it.
That shows that it's important for the leader to think early about succession because it's harder to solve a problem
That's
when
right.
there's only a couple
and trust
years.
me, I talk to pastors, and they're so afraid because of the things you said. Guy, if I brought it up, they do this, and you go, if they know they're going to be handcuffed, and if they know it's just going to be a financial thing, you're killing them. You're killing them. So that part was good. Another thing I got from them, so I got the legacy questions. I got, what am I going to do on the other side? I got the money thing, and then I got them, because as you do this long enough, and this was super valuable, I got the questions that forced me to be brutally honest, which was, so Kenton, because you stay long enough at a church, you have a huge amount of power. And they're saying, so, and you're stepping out, you're going to want to stay on the board? Are you willing to, if you stay on the board, what kind of influence you'd be? They asked me really hard questions for me to answer. Are you willing to be the backup if it's a wrong choice? Will you step back in? And if you're willing to step back in, were you really willing to step out? And is it a willing, and they're just asking you questions about yourself. Are you going to have a job on the other side? Do you want some position on the other side? And if you do, why do you? And what are you trying to hold on to? And all of those questions, every one of those things has a scale of I'm not going to do anything to, oh no, I'm going to be chairman of the board.
Right.
Literally you can, if you want to, I guess, if you've been in a church that long, you could cut a path like that. But what they would do is they would say, if you chose that, what kind of person's going to come? Because it wouldn't have been you if I was the chairman of the board.
Right.
And also,
I love you, but I wouldn't have liked it.
And you shouldn't have. And also, what would it have done to me? Because I'll tell you, one thing I couldn't do is be the chairman of the board. But where do you get to talk through those kind of really brutally honest questions about what does it look like on the other side? And really, it's just a discussion. These people, because they did it, they're talking about leaving. And all of them, had choices because they're owners. Are they going to be members of the board? Are they going to do it? How are they transitioning? They used all sorts of corporate models. But in it, basically what they showed me is I got to do some real soul searching.
Man, it's huge. There's one big question I want to ask before we wrap up this session. But I want to sum up what we've heard so far, which is huge, that for the leader to prepare his heart, her heart, having an emergency succession plan, putting other people around the table to ask questions, doing that early so that the leader has something else they are passionate about in the future. I know you've told me that the summer study break's also helpful because for that 4 or 5 week period of time, you were able to learn how to live without the title of senior pastor being a foundational part of your identity.
Right.
Because during the study break, you essentially left that title for a month or a month and a half. Okay, here's a question that I think a leader could wrestle with, because leadership's hard, local church ministry is hard. There's times where all of us want to stop. There's sometimes after a weekend, you always hear pastors say, whatever you do, don't resign on a Monday, because there's the spiritual weight, there's the spiritual warfare. Sometimes the sermon doesn't go as well as you were hoping it would. You got a bomb of an email. You had a staff transition that was painful. Whatever it is can just wear on you. So sometimes when a leader talks about wanting to step away, it may not be healthy. It might be running from something. How did you determine in your heart that the desires to leave, and you haven't left, but the desire to leave the role of senior pastor, that it was letting go in a healthy way versus letting go in an unhealthy way?
I got a great answer for that.
I'm ready.
Have you ever seen the TV show Love It or List It?
I've never seen that.
Okay, so what it is it's people are in their house and they bring in a team. I think it's a husband-wife team. And the husband is what they do is they say, here's where we would love to live, and this is the house that we would love to look at. And so he takes them and he begins to look at all of the houses that they think they would want. And the wife is actually the one who says, what is it you don't like about this house? What would it take to make this house the house of your dreams? And in the show, what they do is they fix up the house that they're in and make it beautiful and everything that they want. And then this guy goes out and finds the perfect house that the couple wants. And at the end of it, they take them through this.
They compare them.
And they say, do you want to love it, keep it?
Yeah.
Or do you want to list it?
Okay.
And most often,
They end up loving it.
they end up loving it. And they don't list it. And so that principle is a principle that I live by, which is if you're in your church and you have a problem that's driving you away, the first thing, the most important thing a senior pastor can be is self-aware. And self-awareness is this gift that God gives us, because self-discipline is nothing unless you're self-aware. So, if I'm disciplining myself in an area that I'm not weak, it's me, but it's really, I have to.
Okay, that's huge. That's huge. That's worth a lot right there. Self-discipline is not worth anything without self-awareness, because if you're not self-aware, you'll actually develop yourself in an area you don't need to be developed.
That's right.
You need to be aware so that you can learn what areas need to be developed.
And that's what the Holy Spirit's doing all the time.
Amen.
He's giving us this gift of, this is who you are.
Right.
Look at who you are. So every time you see a problem, it's a senior pastor staring at himself. If you've been at the church, now you've been here 5 years.
No, I still want to blame you for some of the problems,
they're
Kenton.
all yours now. They're all yours. But so the point is that now when there's a problem, really when you've been there long enough, the problems are yours.
Yeah.
And the reason you want to say that is because you go, if I created them, I'm the best guy to fix them.
Right.
Because I understood how they got here, the thinking that's got here, and it gives me a chance to grow as a senior pastor. Now I'm self-aware. I'm like, okay, this is kind of a built-in weakness. This didn't work the way I thought, but now I have a chance to change it. When a pastor looks at problems and lets the problems chase him out, and he never fixes them, that story, I don't know. I mean, God's good and he loves his church.
He does.
But that's never a story. But when somebody's willing to say, maybe I should leave, but I'm going to fix this problem before I leave, and I'm going to make it work. And that's what I love about that TV show, because they take, windows don't work, they have to paint it. There's a whole bunch of things that really are, it isn't that hard. Yeah. And they come in and they spend the money. It takes some money and they do it, but they fix it. Now, you want to decide to leave? Great, because now there's not a problem. Yeah. It's not chasing you off. So, I get in the pandemic, sure, everybody's like, I got to get out of here. We'll live through it and then see. But when you have a problem, whatever it is, you go, you know what, I'm going to do to fix this. I'm going to fix this.
So in your last several years as senior pastor, you were still loving it. You were still attacking problems because you loved this church, as opposed to, I'm letting that die. That I'm not even worrying about that problem because I'm not here anymore.
Right. No. So I didn't let them fester. So one is, just as a philosophy, the way I lived is, when I saw a problem, I didn't blame, I didn't minimize, I didn't rationalize. I went, literally, if you've been as long as I have, and I wrote all the doctrinal statements, I wrote everything. It's like, this is me. It's me. I did this. So how do I, I was younger. I didn't know. I was growing. So now I have to fix it. But what I did specifically when it came down to thinking through a transition is I took that same thinking and I said, and this is what the Life Transition Group was great at. They said, what are all the problems in the church that you don't want to hand off? And really, there were things that if I didn't fix, I would have been embarrassed to be around you today. I would have a sense of shame if I didn't, and I started it 5 years before, maybe 6 or 7.
Oh, man, that's so
beautiful.
beautiful.
A list of things that, I could work it.
Right.
But there were personalities that shouldn't be in the church, but I could kind of work with them. There were systems that were, they weren't working, but I could work them.
Right.
There were and you just go, I don't want to hand this off to somebody. I don't want, and I literally made a list. I think there were 20 things on this list of things that I go, I don't want to hand off. And they weren't easy fixes. It wasn't like, oh, hey, let's just go click a box. You had to work at it for a period of time, make some systemic changes, work hard at it. But at the same time, it all makes you love the church. When you do it, it's like one of those things where you go, why didn't I do this before?
That's beautiful.
Why did I carry this burden for so long? I didn't need to do that. And I loved it. I loved it all the more. I love the church more the day I left than I ever loved the church.
Oh, man, that's beautiful. Well, succession begins with preparing the heart of the leader who is going to be transitioning. And so you've heard a case study, an example of a leader who I think did it remarkably well and did not do it in a microwaved fashion, but thought about succession for over a decade, put people around him to ask deep, thoughtful questions that encouraged him to think more about what succession would look like, put together early on emergency succession plans that forced him to think about future questions, and until the day he transitioned, thought, how do I make this church the most effective it can be for the leader who's going to follow me? So it all begins with preparing the leader. Next session, we'll talk about how to prepare the church or the organization. Thanks for joining us today.